My friendship with Scott goes back to before I moved to the West Coast. He's an artist and a programmer that made his name coding phenomenal generative artwork. His most well-known piece, titled Electric Sheep, started as a self-evolving algorithm, gaining traction in the motion graphics community before becoming a phenomena unto itself. Seeing the potential in crowdsourcing the processing that created the generative patterns, he created a system allowing users to vote on the individual characteristics of each pattern and allowed the most successful art pieces to mate with each other, creating offspring with similar traits based on that of its parents. In this way, Scott's art evolves and progresses with a life of its own. Today I sat down with Scott in the offices of his new employer, CTRL-Labs, a company working to bridge the human-computer divide with a new type of user input device that taps directly into the nerve impulses in a user's wrist. Doesn't get much more transhuman than that. Enjoy the episode. And thanks for doing this.
Oh, no problem.
Probably super slammed.
It's just the usual. No, it's a good time. We just had Creative Tech Week, so I just did a bunch of stuff for that, including making some new artwork, which I'm excited to talk about. That is a festival that's annual here in New York, and it's just all about creative technologies, so that includes stuff like I do, software art, generative art, algorithmic art, but also just electronic art, electronic music, video games, web, computer stuff, film, video, all just, and both the sort of indie artistic kind of stuff, but also the the advertising, experiential stuff. There's a lot of sort of creative industry in New York, and so the point of the festival is to bring those people together and give people a chance to show off and connect. And
that's cool, man. There's so much new media art that's happening in New York. It blows my mind because it's orders of magnitude more than there is in the Bay Area, it seems. But
they're both players, and there's other stuff, other parts of the world too.
Yeah. Let me introduce you real quick. This is Scott Draves, creator of Electric Sheep, a good friend of mine for a long time, and somebody I'm super stoked to talk to.
All right, thank you, Mr. Pope.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I think I typed your name into my Gmail, which goes way back, and I saw that you were in my address book of when I first had my first smartphone, which was actually a Sidekick. If you remember the Sidekick?
Yeah, I do, man. I do.
I had one of those, and so I put you were in the address book of that phone when I emailed myself a CSV file.
Yeah. Well, I was trying to figure out earlier today how we met, and I couldn't remember, because I remember when I moved to the Bay Area, you hooked me up with, what was that group, that dance group called? It was,
oh, jeez.
Wasn't the Roots Society, was it the Rhythm Society?
Rhythm Society,
yeah,
yes.
Rhythm Society. And you connected me with, was it Christopher Sharp? Who I just interviewed, actually. And I think my first experience in the Bay Area was going to a Rhythm Society festival, their year-end festival.
Yeah.
And
well, they have 4 events per year, including a New Year's Eve.
Yeah.
I don't know which one. That's awesome.
Talking about a long time ago.
Those guys are
while
great.
I was still touring.
Yeah, what's Chris up to? I mean, he makes incredible stuff. Last time I remember, it was huge sculptural Burning Man style warehouse
still
stuff.
Doing big sculptural Burning Man warehouse style stuff.
Hey, guess what? Well, I'm still doing the Electric Sheep. It's been that long.
Yeah. Well, that's good though. I mean, sometimes I think that the only way to make something successful is to push on it for a good long time, and that's how you become known for something. That's how something gets off the ground. It's
true. It takes a lot. It definitely took me a long time. It does. Some people get lucky or are total geniuses and find a shortcut. Who knows? But in my case, it was.
I think it's called investment. when investment happens, that's the shortcut, right? But
there's one, money. But in my case, it was persistence and luck, really. So I started Electric Sheep in 1999,
Wow.
which is 20 years ago.
Yeah, 20 years.
It was actually the very first version I wrote in like just a week. I guess I was in between jobs. I had like just moved to San Francisco, and I think like I took 1 week to do nothing, 1 week to write the first Electric Sheep version, and then like in 1 week I like went to Burning Man. It was like
I mean, you know, those two things have to go hand in hand together. But let's just let's remind people what Electric Sheep is, or tell people who don't know. It's a generative visual algorithm.
That's right.
You packaged as a screensaver, but really it's generative visuals based on an algorithm which you wrote.
Even further, that predates Electric Sheep. That's even older, and I'll tell that story too. But yeah, the Electric Sheep is infinite animation that's created with the collective intelligence of the internet, and by collective intelligence, I mean thousands of computers and thousands of people working together. It's really these days the most accurate term for it is artificial intelligence, since
So Electric Sheep uses computer learning.
Machine learning.
Machine learning?
Totally.
Interesting. I didn't realize that. I thought it was just... Well, I knew that it was a distributed processing load.
There's that, which is part of it, but there's an AI learning part as well. And so the distributed part is based on this rendering algorithm. And so really, to understand it or to explain it, I have to go back to the fundamental generative algorithm.
Let's go back.
The flame algorithm, which is actually really my first official like artwork, and as far as I know is the first open source artwork.
Interesting. So you developed it as and what was it? Just like an open source toolkit?
It's a piece of code, and it's a render engine that defined a visual language. Mm-hmm. And so it was, it's the algorithm is kind of a combination between a particle system and a fractal.
I was just going to bring that up because it looks very fractal. You know, it looks reminiscent of fractal, but it is after having played with a number of particle generators, you can see how. It is a particle generator.
It's also, and because it has the particle aspect, so it's, the fractals that most people are most familiar with are called Mandelbrot fractals or Julia fractals, this kind of thing. Totally different algorithm. Those do not have a particle system. The way those things work is essentially you just loop over all the pixels on the screen, and for every pixel you run this iteration. And you do this math, and based on the answer, you draw the color, and then you fill up the screen, and you get a picture, and it looks like a fractal.
Right.
And that's just different from how the flame algorithm works, which is a whole different sort of category of things. Essentially, you instead of looping over the pixels, you just have a loop that generates particles. And each particle lands somewhere on the screen.
Right.
And then you have to, and then there's a little bit of extra work to sort of shade the particles and make the image out of them.
Now, this was all pre-open frameworks?
Oh yeah, I started working on it in the 80s. Wow.
Yeah, so way before all that. What'd you write it in?
Just C. And so it's straight C. Yeah, it predates. C++ didn't even exist, and it doesn't use OpenGL, doesn't use the frame buffer, doesn't work with lines or polygons or circles or geometry or anything like that.
Yeah.
And really that was kind of the idea. What I was trying to do was to get beyond the lines and the polygons and the geometry. That is our normal visual language of computer graphics.
Well, did that even exist as a framework back then?
Oh, totally. Yeah, the standard graphics languages, GL existed at that time. It wasn't called OpenGL.
In the 80s?
Absolutely.
Wow, interesting. I thought that was a relatively modern, as in the last 15 years, phenomena.
Nope. So that GL came from a company called SGI, and it was
Like the SGI workstation.
the SGI, yeah, totally. And it just eventually OGL, which was their graphics language, got turned into OpenGL, and what had its own life. But even before GL, just like every computer, like going back to the the 60s, as soon as they had raster screens.
Yeah.
They had graphics APIs and the way like the original Mac, or you had a graphics API where you could draw a line, you could draw a polygon, you could draw a rectangle, you could clear the screen, you could write text.
Now,
Those were the things you could do, and I did all those things. I did that stuff. I did that kind of computer graphics for years, and I found I wanted to go beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically I was there were two things going on. One thing is I thought that the normal computer graphics was kind of like hard and mechanical, and like I was interested in like the real world, like nature, life,
like fluid dynamics.
The subtlety, the shading, like curvy, wiggly, undefined lines, shapes, like algae or whatever. It's like furry, right?
Sure. Mimicking nature.
Right. And so I wanted to come up with a computer graphics that could, reproduce that kind of subtlety, like the brush strokes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Brush strokes. So there's some like texture there. There's like some meat. So that was one of my objectives, and the other one was to come up with something which was basically just not boring to me.
Yeah.
And I mean a particular thing by that, which is, when I was a kid and I learned, to program pretty much just sitting at home. I was just by myself in the dark with a computer and trying to writing programs and running them and drawing lines and polygons.
Yeah, I feel like this is the origin story of
Spirograph.
every computer scientist.
That's right. I remember very, very clearly some of the first programs I wrote was in BASIC on the Apple II computer, which is what I had.
Yeah.
Line 10, right? I equals 0. Line 20, print I. Mm-hmm. Line 30, I equals I plus 1. Line 40, go to 20.
It was like a souped up graphing calculator.
So it just looped and printed numbers, and so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? And then the screen would scroll down as it filled with numbers, right?
Yeah.
And then as the numbers got longer, they would sort of make patterns and change, and it would basically make an animation on the screen.
Yeah.
So it's literally with 4 lines of code, you could make an animation.
Right.
But but it was kind of got boring.
It was ASCII art.
Yeah, exactly. It was ASCII art.
Yeah.
That was the very, very, very beginning. And after about 5 seconds or 10 seconds, you watch that thing, you basically you can see the patterns, and it kind of gets boring, right?
Yeah.
And then pretty soon it's just numbers scrolling on the screen. After a while, it's just not. You're done. So, I would try to come up with a more so if you think of, whatever, I would do spirograph. I would draw random lines, or all kinds of stuff, and I was trying to come up. If you think of the computer as just doing what you say, then why would the result ever surprise you? You know what I mean?
Sure.
And why would it be? There's no drama,
Sure.
right? So in a story, there has to be drama.
Right. Well, this is when it gets into advanced mathematics, where it's not such a predictable outcome.
That's right. And so the first step to making a program that's not boring is just put in some random numbers, right? And But if you do that, like, it produces some variety, and if you're lucky, then the results actually might be aesthetic also. You know, like if you draw 10 random lines on the screen, every once in a while, those 10 lines are going to sort of like, just by chance, are going to like look like something cool,
Sure.
right? You're going to say like, oh, that looks like
Well, then that's
the Mona Lisa's face, or
that's the formula then, because Electric Sheep, it has a look, it has an aesthetic.
Well, we'll get to that. But this was it was a long process, and so this idea that you can use randomness, and the computer can like make a cool picture that has some aesthetic, but it's basically it's just not very often.
Sure. Well, if you're just shooting in the dark. Then,
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
So then I was like, well, how can I write a program that, you know, basically gets lucky all the time?
Right.
Never miss it. You know what I mean? That's
Yes.
never miss.
Yeah.
Or like, you know, like instead of 1%, can it be 10%? Can it be 20%? Can it be 50%? Can it be 90%?
Sure, you're looking for that
Yeah, like even a creative person is going to screw up sometimes.
you need that formula, or that it's an aesthetic, it's a style.
Yeah.
It's a mathematical style.
Well, you need a language, and a language that can, you know, express things that are aesthetic.
Yeah.
And so, and I found, you know, language was the way that I could sort of cross over from sort of the finite to the infinite. And by that I mean, like, you know, like writing like if I show you pictures, if I give you an algorithm and it's always sort of doing stuff that's kind of the same, that's, you know, it's finite. And
Well, it gets very repetitive.
Right.
Or formulaic.
And so, you know, if I can generate like random sentences of even a finite number of with a finite number of words, I can create an infinite number of sentences.
Well, it's that paradigm with the monkey and
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Every once in a while, if the monkey is totally random, every once in a long while he'll get lucky.
Sure.
But if we give him a keyboard that's sort of locked down, so that he can only type grammatical sentences,
Right.
And he's basically doing, you know, like. What's the thing where you write in the words in pick a word adventure or whatever?
like Hangman?
No, that's not what I mean.
Sudoku? That's numbers.
No.
Anyway,
you can rig it up so that the you can make it so that the monkey can only type grammatical sentences.
Yeah,
It's like multiple choice.
you
right?
can guide their
Exactly.
guide their aesthetic evolution.
Right, and then the chances of the monkey typing something interesting goes way up.
Right.
Right.
So you just lock down your formula, or you learned how to lock down your formula.
That's right. And I designed a language where basically it's easy to say beautiful things.
Yeah. Right.
And that was the flame algorithm.
Interesting.
And so it is. It's a set of and the algorithm that solves it has to solve a mathematical equation. And like I said, the way it draws the images is not based on like normal computer graphics. It's not based on normal fractals. It's based on running this sort of simulation, generating like zillions of particles, and then it has like a shading algorithm and a coloring algorithm to like make the final image. And it's just really, it just takes a lot of time to generate a lot of particles.
Yeah. And that's
so
very, very processor intensive.
Very processor intensive. It's like, so in the typical images in the Electric Sheep now are like 10 billion particles.
Sure.
And
Way beyond real-time computation.
that's right. And so it takes, at least 10 minutes, maybe, on a low-end old PC, when like years ago I used to say an hour. Mm-hmm. These days it's actually less because everything is fast. But it's like far from real time. And so so in the mid 90s, so I think that I published, I did a series of, I've been working on this algorithm for years, since I was an undergrad. And eventually I was out in Japan, actually.
I was just in Tokyo. It's such a cool country.
Yeah, and that's where I finally made the first version of this flame algorithm. It was like 1991 in the summer in Tokyo. And the way it happened is I had access. I was working in this lab, and I had access to an SGI supercomputer, and it was basically unused.
Well, shit.
And so,
what is a young Scott Draves to do?
So this thing was like sort of my telescope that allowed me to go into the future, and so I'd been working with this equation for years, and always sort of had made kind of approximations.
Yeah.
In order to get an answer, to get an image in a reasonable amount of time. And so for the first time I just said, fuck it, I'm just going to accumulate all the data and just come up with not an exact solution, but a stochastically correct solution. And the supercomputer was able to do that in a reasonable amount of time. And the results were amazing, something new, something that I had never seen before, something that nobody had ever seen before.
So you're just watching this thing draw your output raster line by line, or?
No, it doesn't work that way, because it doesn't draw line by line. It computes the image holographically, it computes the image all at once.
Interesting.
And so I guess I could make it write sort of partial results or something like that, but basically it's a command line tool. It just runs for however many minutes or hours, and then it writes out a PNG.
Man,
you're done.
That was the era of the mainframe. It's such a cool paradigm, and it's a paradigm that I completely missed out on. I'm so curious now, because I am a visual artist. It's how do the tools work back in the day? It's not like woodworking, where you still have a chisel. It's just an updated version of a chisel. It's we don't even have the equivalent of an SGI workstation that had its own OS, that had its own protocols, its own workflow, and that's gone.
It's gone, but it's not too different from.
Well, it's evolved.
I'm over at my desk over there. There's a terminal with a Linux and in the cloud. And
yeah.
It's not too different. It's still the command line. It's still Unix.
Now, is that how you interfaced with an SGI workstation? It's through command line.
Yeah, I mean it had a GUI. It had a Windows system.
Yeah.
But the main work. I mean, I've always been a, text editor guy for programming.
Yeah.
That's how it was done. Yes, but so basically it made the images, unlike anything anybody's ever seen. And I just sort of was doing it for my own entertainment. I mean, eventually I showed my Andy Whitkin, my PhD advisor at that time. And he was like, wow, these are great. You should submit them to this art competition, the Pre-Ars Electronica, which he had actually just won a prize from the previous year. And so, I didn't really think of myself as an artist. I didn't think I was making art. This was for my own curiosity. And so on his suggestion, I did the submission, which meant actually using a 35 millimeter film camera and taking pictures of the screen and making slides and putting them in a big envelope and sending them to Austria.
Right.
Along with a couple of essays.
That's an ironic finish to the ultimate digital expression.
It basically it got a prize, and so I was like, holy shit, this is other people care.
Sure.
Right? And this is art, right?
That's a good feeling when you realize wow, I did a thing. People appreciate this. So are you trained as a mathematician? Is that what you went to school for?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Math, and then I got another degree in computer science.
I was wondering that. That was one of the questions that I wanted to ask you, because so much of what you do is math.
Yeah.
You just create beautiful math.
That's what I do.
Yeah.
But it's mostly math that is expressed through programming.
Well, Well, I mean, that's
So computers, everything
the
that
modern expression of math.
yeah,
is
everything. Ultimately, everything that computer does is math. It can be reduced to ones and zeros, and but on the other hand, the experience of doing math is very different from the profession of mathematics is very different from the profession of like software engineering, which is really how I more think of myself.
They're cousins.
I don't think of myself as a mathematician. I do think of myself as using math.
Yeah.
I don't know if I ever really had much of a mathematical invention. You know what I mean?
No, I think, honestly, man, I think that electric sheep is a mathematical invention, and it's a noteworthy mathematical invention. And I was actually reading through your Wikipedia page, and you also did something with, like, image collaging.
I did.
Yeah, and that's another example.
The fuse algorithm.
Yeah. I want to talk to you about that at some point, but
Sure.
It's what you're doing is beautiful mathematics, and that's really cool. It's all generative visuals. I've always been fascinated by them because I am also, like, my aesthetic is very natural. I'm drawn to that aesthetic, and that's how you derive, that's how you explain nature, that's how you describe nature, is through math.
Yeah, well, I mean,
I can't do that.
It provides us, a lot of sort of technology is not very humanistic, and so putting a little bit of this kind of soft stuff, the softness of nature into the computer, I think makes it makes it attractive to people, or it gives people something worth responding to.
Yeah.
But it does have a price, which is, rendering these kinds of images is super expensive. And so
Computationally.
Yes. And so for a long time, after I first made the algorithm, I put it online, and so this was like early 90s when sort of it became like the first open source artwork. But I wasn't really, I was getting some code contributions, and then but the project was moving very slowly. Things just didn't happen that fast back then.
Well, I mean, I'm sure the open source movement was much smaller.
Exactly. And it wasn't things weren't online so much. There was no, GitHub. There was no,
Right.
It's hard to
Talk about, like, a revolution.
I know.
GitHub, man. It's
there
like
was
the
no
Facebook.
Google. There was no fucking Google.
Do you remember Alta Vista?
Yes, I do. So it was. So things were. There a couple of things happened, and so I made plugins for After Effects.
I was going to ask you about that. See, that's when I came into that world.
Yeah.
I came in through the lens of, the motion graphics packages, and that's...
Right.
I've seen a lot of artists kind of do comparable... similar... There are people who are on the same path as you are go through, Touch Designer, for example, or Max MSP to a lesser degree, and, 3D Studio Max or Nuke. It's like these packages kind of allow you to create iterative work, but from a much higher level.
Yeah, so now there's, things that these whole applications and frameworks that do create an environment where you just can, with a few lines of code, or... Not even code, man. We're talking about dragging modules, and dropping. Yeah. It's all modules. I mean, some of it's code. Some of it is code. Yeah, and there's not that much difference between code and modules. It's just it's a different way of looking at it's the same programming. It's just data structures underneath. But the... so it was... So After Effects... making this algorithm accessible to After Effects was totally transformative, right? Because all these new people who weren't command line people, could then access it, right, and do stuff. And so I didn't even realize that. Actually, maybe I did realize. You're reminding me that it was called Flame, right? AE Flame. Yeah. I remember that, man. I remember that After Effects plugin. And I was just like, oh shit, this is Scott's work. Yeah. That's cool. So that was the first kind of release of Flame? Well, I mean, it was released before as a command line program on my website that nobody used. Right. Well, After Effects is definitely a great gateway to... And then what happened was, I mean, I don't know, somewhere around 99, eventually, I got in the mail a VHS tape.
I remember those.
And I played it, and it was an animation, made with the Flame algorithm, and it was by, and I forget who did it, which is really embarrassing. It's just been too long, but they, like some effects house, some VFX studio had, some of the guys had done some after hours work, basically.
Yeah.
And, they have a render farm. They put it to work.
Right.
I didn't have a render farm. Like I wasn't able to make that kind of animation.
Yeah. And it was the limitation was the processing power.
Because of the processing power. And so I watched this thing and I was blown away. I was like, wow, I wish I could do that. And actually, but it really basically at the same time, there was a release of the first distributed screensaver, which was SETI at Home.
See, that's the first time I became aware of collaborative computation.
Right.
Was through folding at home. Do you remember folding
Sure.
at home? It was protein folding.
Sure.
And then SETI at home.
SETI was by far the first.
Was it really?
Yeah. So or maybe, so it was 99. It was released in spring of 99. And I had just heard about it. And so I just put two and two together. Excuse me. And said, oh my gosh, I can, instead of searching for alien signals, I can bring these animations to life.
I mean, fuck it. Why not?
And so that was the first version of Electric Sheep, and it started to grow and evolve because it was open source. I would get contributions and improvements from the public, and one of the really big objectives of sort of my artwork is to find a way to get something that, like I said, that's something that surprises me, to exceed myself.
For
right?
sure.
And so
then it's like becoming a living organism almost. It's like
and
giving
so
birth to this formula. It's going to go out there and it's going to generate.
Yeah, and so part of in the 90s, as I was sort of studying information theory and artificial intelligence, that's when I sort of came upon my concept, which is I'm trying to sort of create life in digital form, like artificial intelligence or artificial life, and sort of my objective was really was right there, was to create a life form outside myself.
Yeah, or an evolving
that could be that could independently be creative, and there's some, I think I've had some degree of success. It's not creative like a real person. It's not conscious and intelligent like we are, right? It's just, but it's got a little thing. I do see some kind of spark, and I've definitely seen the Electric Sheep do things that I didn't understand and that I didn't put there.
Well, let's go into that for a second, because I want to understand better how does Electric Sheep, is it a self-learning thing? Does it refine itself, or does it refine itself through iterations?
It refines itself through user feedback.
Okay, right, because people vote on what's good and what's bad.
Exactly.
Man, this is the original. People argue that's what Facebook is, this symbiotic life form.
Yeah.
That's basically using our likes, our feedback in order to refine the bullshit it's throwing at you, basically.
Yeah, and you could say there's lots of, Reddit or whatever was one of the first sort of online communities with the voting thing.
Yeah.
So this was not in the very first version of Electric Sheep, so not in 99, but I think maybe a year or two later. I don't remember when I put in the voting feedback. But basically, so the distributed computing thing, that means that all the computers that are running the screensaver are working together as a supercomputer to render the animations. Basically, each PC renders one frame and uploads the frames, and the server collects all the frames and compresses them into video. All the clients download the videos and show them on the screen.
Yeah.
So that's how it's possible to have this sort of collective hallucination, even though every single, and as you're watching that video, those bits, those images are actually coming from the whole internet-wide.
Not in real time, though.
Not in real time, but they were computed by,
Right.
everybody as you watch it. You're watching a group work or whatever.
Sure. So no one pattern was done by one computer. It was
It's kind of like, it's more like one frame. That's right. No one sheep was done by one person, but it is kind of like,
they're called sheep. Like
each design is a sheep.
Nice.
That's right. Because each one has a genetic code.
Yeah.
And that's where the evolution comes in, and that's where the voting comes in. So the distributed computing thing, that just describes the rendering algorithm.
Yeah.
That doesn't describe the design algorithm, which is sort of harder and sort of more important.
So how many variables are involved in like the algorithm? For example, your voting system is voting up and down on parameters. How many parameters are there in a sheep or in the system?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically thousands.
Really? So it's a massive number of sliders that you could be tweaking.
That's right.
Yeah.
And they don't, it's not like a fixed list either, it's kind of open-ended. Mm-hmm. And that's why I call it a language.
Interesting.
And so it's probably not a language where you could write a novel. You know what I mean? But it is, like I said, if you think about it as like...
It would be a good-looking novel.
Well, it's like thousands of numbers, and each number is like a floating point number.
Yeah.
Some of those numbers are not super exciting. Like there's a palette, right? Uh-huh. So that's 768 numbers.
Yeah, it's just your RGB palette.
RGB palette times 256.
Right.
So, so in some sense, like 1,000 knobs is just the color, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's not too, but then there's a bunch of knobs for like the parameters of the equations and the iterations, and those are the ones that are kind of like structural or that are interesting. And there's thousands of them also. But if you put it together, it's like the amount of the number of bits is enough for like just a couple pages.
Sure.
So it's kind of like maybe it's like a poem.
Right.
Right. It's not a novel, but it's like a haiku.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's a good way of putting it. I like that.
So there's some substance. You can say something, but it's like a mood.
Right.
It's not like a whole. But the problem is, it's super unpredictable on how to adjust the knobs to like get what you want. But it turns out that's totally fine with me because I'm not the kind of artist who actually. The way I work is not. I don't have a vision that I'm trying to reproduce.
Well, no, you've created a system.
What I want, yeah, exactly. I want the system. I want the system to come to me.
Sure.
And so there's two ways that happens in the electric sheep. So, and one of them is the AI, which is this genetic algorithm, Darwinian evolution, where each parameter set, basically, each 1,000 numbers produces one animation.
Yeah.
And then people vote on the animations. They show up on everybody's screen. They get rendered by this distributed system.
Is it just an up-down vote?
People vote up-down. That's right. And not everybody votes. A lot of people probably don't even know that you can vote.
Yeah.
But there's enough of them do that I get a clear signal, and then the more popular sheep mate with each other and reproduce. And so it does this with the genetic algorithm, which includes crossover, where basically it writes down the parameters in like a list, and then it kind of like takes some of these and some of these and some of these.
Yeah.
And so it has a child parameter set that has input from both parents. Sometimes there's like mutations, just flip stuff around randomly.
So it's still using the genetics of both sheep.
That's right.
Right, but the environment that the evolutionary factor is the up-down votes.
The up-down votes are what drive, is how it chooses which sheep to mate.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. So it's really like the look of Electric Sheep, the aesthetic of Electric Sheep is constantly evolving, even now. So is it running on like a server somewhere? Do you have like a central server that's doing that math?
Yep.
Yeah. And then basically farming out the computation work?
That's right.
And that's just been running for the past 20 years.
That's right.
Nice.
So I have I have a big database, or I should say a bunch of databases of these images and animations and the genetic codes, the parameters.
Have you noticed the change over time?
I don't know if it really has changed in any particular sort of character or sort of like organized way. Because what people want, people are really irrational, and what they want changes over time.
Yeah.
And even, and again, even if you make something really cool and keep showing it to people, eventually they get bored and then they don't like it. So does that make sense? So
of course. Well, that's what I mean. It's like
so
the evolutionary landscape changes over
That's
time.
right.
Like depending on who's looking, and I'm sure that back 10 years ago you had a whole different user base than you do now.
That's right. But in aggregate, people are not that different, and I don't know. Like the basic things that's driving the life and death and the evolution are like things that are like obviously broken and ugly and stupid.
Yeah.
Are the things that get voted down and die.
Right.
You know what I mean? And things that have like just bright colors and symmetric designs and like the usual stuff that people have been responding to visually for hundreds of years.
Sure.
Are the things that are popular and people vote for. And one thing that's really interesting is that kind of aesthetic, bright colors, highly symmetric. It's kind of like the rave style, right? Rainbow swirls,
sure,
hearts, and
yeah.
hearts and unicorns.
Oh my god!
Is that kind of stuff is very popular in the Electric Sheep.
Your ultimate animation is just gonna be like a kitten face.
Yeah. When a cat appears in the Electric Sheep, I know I'm done. Then what? We have to turn it off.
Yeah, I was gonna say, man, maybe like giving it over to the humans to vote on wasn't the best decision.
Well, the point I'm trying to make is that that's actually not my aesthetic.
Sure. Yeah. Well, that must be interesting to see how other people take it.
Yeah, and so so at some point, so the Electric Sheep is such a long story, but what happened was it got popular, which is a good thing, but it's also a bad thing because it's having thousands of people as your free render farm is great. Having thousands of computers downloading videos from your server is expensive.
Right.
So
it's too bad Bitcoin didn't exist back then. You could have just hashed some Bitcoin and paid for your bandwidth.
It might have worked. At least I would have Bitcoins, whatever that's worth.
Right.
But I didn't do that. Instead, I just tried to figure out how to like sort of monetize this, and this was partly just an attempt to like make it sustainable. Like basically if it's draining my bank account, it's just not gonna work.
At a certain point in time in every project, when it starts to cost, it's either donations. There's
right. No matter how
model.
cool it is, at some point you're like, what the fuck? Like, okay.
Yep.
I have to choose between my kids going to college and a screensaver.
Yeah. It's a really cool screensaver, though, Scott.
Do I want healthcare or screensaver? But there was also, the big part of it was this theory of artificial life, and I wanted to make in order for something to be truly alive, I feel like it has to pay for itself. Otherwise, it's not sustainable, and then it's going to die. Right?
Right.
And so the equivalent, our body has a respiratory system. It has energy that flows with it. We eat, right? And so in cyberspace, in the virtual version of energy is money.
Yeah, I mean, computation and bandwidth for oxygen.
Right, and
both of those
other-
cost. Yeah, you have to trade dollar
there's sort
points.
of a physics of the virtual world. And so I felt like it needed to have like it needed a respiratory system.
Sure.
And so my first idea actually on how to sort of make a business model for it so that it could pay for itself was the VJ business.
Yeah, because you did VJ for quite a while. That's how I met you, Scott.
Yeah.
That's how I met you. It's through the VJ scene. Yeah, now I remember. I don't know. Do you know Toshi?
Toshi who?
Yeah, okay, maybe that's how I know you then. Anyway, sorry, sidetracked. But yes, gotta make this thing self-sustainable.
And so the idea was, okay, the software is free. I mean, that was, I guess, a given.
Yeah.
And this is a classic problem with open source business models. How can you make a living from open source?
Right. Well, GeForce tried to charge for their screensaver, and look what happened to that.
What did happen to that?
I have no idea exactly. Right?
I think didn't that guy end up working for Microsoft and get licensed into Xbox or something, or?
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, he's.
I hope he did okay.
I'm sure he did, man. He was another talented generative artist. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. There was and even before GeForce, there was a thing called Cthulhu.
I remember that. I remember Cthulhu.
By some Australian guy, Total Freak.
I don't know him. I don't know the story behind that, but I definitely, in my early VJing days, I downloaded that.
Yeah, that was the inspiration. That's where GeForce got their basic algorithm. Cthulhu was the first one to do that sort of iterative blending of the image.
Yeah, and then the Winamp plugin. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah.
That was the first time that I encountered generative visuals, was through that Winamp, that Winamp plugin, and there was all kinds of parameters that you could kind of tweak and play with, and for some reason it seemed like that was all tied up with GeForce. Like maybe GeForce was like a part of that, or
I think it came out of that. It was kind of the synthesis. Where he basically just made a better version of stuff that was happening in that community. But yeah, so there were people, like, there was shareware. People were charging $15, $20 for weird pieces of software.
Right.
I just didn't see that as a
trading it on floppy disks.
Yeah, like I just felt like open source was like a better, like there was something really good about open source.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to do that, and so I did.
Well, the same way you're farming out your computational load with
you can farm out some sort of development workload. Yeah.
Exactly.
But even it's even better than that. And so what a super important thing I learned from open sourcing the Flame algorithm wasn't that I got like free work done for me, and there was some of that, but I mean, but there was something better that happens, which is people do things which you didn't even which wasn't even on your agenda.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well,
So
it's the creative load too, right? It's like all of a sudden you have like a creative share.
That's right. And so like so from the Flame algorithm, like I said, there was the AE Flame thing, which I did, but there was also eventually there was another Australian guy named Mark Townsend. Made a thing called
that name. How do I know that name?
Apophysis.
Okay.
Which was a Windows port of the Flame algorithm with a GUI.
Sure.
So that you could design sort of fractal flames by turning all the knobs of all those parameters.
Yeah.
Which is not something I ever wanted to do. Like I'm not into it. I don't do that.
Yeah.
So that wasn't my idea.
Well, you kind of did that with the After Effects plugin.
It's actually true.
That's what gave me access to playing around with your.
But I never. Well, anyway, but it turned out, but there are lots of people who want to do that.
Yeah.
And so
I'd say more people want to do that than want to tweak a command line.
For sure. But with the Electric Sheep, no command line is required. I mean, you can just play and watch.
Right.
The ultimate.
If you want to have control, if you don't want to watch TV.
Right.
It's
So anyway, so the guy did something which was not on my agenda, which turned out which was hugely popular, and brought, even more people into the ecosystem than were there, than I started with.
Yeah.
So that's like, I think that's the real sort of key to open source, is this like mutational property. Like his kind of version took it in a direction that just allowed the whole thing to grow. So that was, and then we brought that into the electric sheep so I described how the AI works by making designs based on voting and then the genetic algorithm. So and the genetic algorithm is an AI technique, like basically from the 80s kind of thing. It's like, it's not what there's an AI revolution going on right now.
Yeah.
That's based on neural networks. So this was kind of like the previous, previous revolution.
Yeah, I don't know enough about machine learning. I mean, I understand the basics, but I don't know enough about the nuances to make comparisons between the different generations.
Yeah. So anyway, it does a lot of stuff. I mean, it's not as good at sort of like image processing and things like that, but it is capable of sort of creative design.
Sure.
And I learned to use it for computer graphics from this guy, Carl Sims, especially. He did really amazing seminal work in generative graphics, and especially using the genetic algorithm.
Yeah, and in at its core, machine learning is all about like evolutionary code. Yeah, it seems like that's how you have an evolving code set. It's like you have.
Well, it's one way to do it. I mean, there's so many generative techniques. They don't all. I would hesitate to put that is one category of them. Let's say that.
Was that the previous generation, or is that how that began?
I would say before the genetic algorithms, I would say the AI there was a generation of AI that you could call expert systems, which was kind of and there was generative computer art based on that technique.
Describe that though. How did that work?
So an expert system was based on the idea that you could like take knowledge and encode it as a series of rules, like
rule based.
If probably like if then rules or something like that, or heuristics,
which completely negates any kind of creativity.
Well, because it can be combined with random numbers, and so for example, there was a computer artist who did a thing called Aaron, like the name Aaron. Mm-hmm. They would basically draw portraits, and it was a generative art expert system, sort of from the 70s and 80s. That was, quite famous. I mean, I'm sure like every major newspaper and magazine like wrote a story about it at some point. So
back in the 70s, when we were on the cusp of human level machine intelligence.
It was a thing. I mean, it was the best, and it was the best thing around in that day.
That's cool how there's been throughout the existence of computation, there's always been art that's based on that.
It's true.
And like artists who are using those tools.
That's a really good point. Is each technology sort of gets repurposed, for creative and artistic ends. Because expert systems weren't developed to make art. They were developed to satisfy the Department of Defense. And
I think most modern art movements are based on repurposing of technology. Definitely technology art. I mean, that's all based on the repurposing of technology in creative ways.
It's true, but I will say it has now gone both ways.
Explain.
So the neural networks are enabled by GPU computation.
Right. Interesting.
And GPUs were developed for video games.
Sure.
Which is entertainment.
Yeah,
an art form.
GPUs, it's really fascinating what's happening with GPUs right now because they're basically, they are the de facto platform for so many cutting edge types of computation. Right?
That's
Whether
right.
you're talking about like mining or large neural network systems, it's all GPU, right? And that's just massively multiprocessor.
That's all it is.
Well, it mimics the human brain.
Exactly.
Right? You don't need a single processor that runs at 5 gigahertz. You need 1,000 or 10,000 processors that run at 900 or whatever
1 gigahertz
or less. It's about the ability to write code that scales to that number of processors.
Data parallel.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting what's happened. And I think another thing that's also enabled it is really the open source angle, because all the neural nets techniques are now all published in Python code, and there's open source libraries that implement all the neural networks, and so because the code is shared now, the field is advancing really rapidly.
Well, not to get too meta, but don't you think that like open source is an example of massively multiprocessing programming?
It is.
I mean, it's a way of taking that programming load and distributing it among many processors.
Yeah, totally. All the people, all the developers, everybody having their own, everybody fixing the bugs, everybody having ideas on how to improve it.
Why have 10 programmers when you could have 10,000?
Yeah, and that is the true sort of kind of collective intelligence that I think is really going to sort of accelerate humanity into that kind of singularity thing.
See, that's what future. I think. That is the main. There's a lot of problems being.
And there's further. It's not the end of the story, because open source will be refined and exceeded and superseded, and the open source ecosystem, the open source business models that we have today have huge problems that need to be fixed, and well,
it's a paradigm though, right? It's like not open source. You're limited by the resources that a company can put into something. Open source, you're limited by the popularity of an idea, right?
It's out of control.
Well, that's one of the main benefits of everybody's. It is very apparent what the negative sides of the internet at this point. In this day and age, right? The internet is like, oh, right, it's not a utopian future.
And open source has some of these same problems.
But open source is one of the few areas where it's like, okay, the ability for an infinite number of people to collaborate on a problem, that is an example of the power of the internet and that kind of information sharing.
Yeah, and I think things like, Bitcoin and other kinds of weird, community communication mechanisms, and I don't really know what they are. I think there are ways of evolving open source beyond what we have today that will sort of address things like funding open source.
Yeah.
And, kind of like the spam problems and the problem of, trolls and harassment and fake news and, all
deep fakes, man. That's the next frontier. That's gonna fuck this election.
Oh, I don't even want to think about it.
Well, I'm just saying, it's happening now. Deep fakes are on the cusp.
Sure. I just saw Pelosi drunk on Reddit today.
Deep fake Pelosi.
I don't know. Yeah.
Who knows,
I didn't click on the link to confirm that it was made with that it was a deep fake, but
I mean, Adobe has a tool now. It's how more accessible can it be? Yeah, it's crazy, man. So do you ever see yourself coming out with a real-time version of Sheep?
Totally. I mean, I have a prototype.
Do you?
We did it.
Because that's the wave, man. That's what's happening right now is real-time motion graphics, right?
Yeah.
That's real-time generation.
So a couple of years ago, and I forget what the real instigation was, but I mean, compared to even 20 years ago when the Electric Sheep started, computers are like, 1,000 times faster now.
Yeah.
And we've got the GPUs.
Yeah.
And so eventually I was like, even though, even with a GPU, I don't think I can do like 10 billion particles at 30 FPS. But you don't really need 10 billion particles to draw a picture. In fact, even with just like 1 million particles, it can make a pretty nice image.
I was gonna say, man, the current generation of GPUs is pretty insane, and
right.
I've been playing with the GPUs with particle generators in the platforms that I use, and yeah, it's amazing. It's almost like movies and cinema is going to merge with VR and game engines. Like game engines are going to be the new platforms that cinema is created in.
That's right, and you're gonna like drop into a world that's generated in real time.
Sure.
And you will participate in that, and there will be characters that you.
It's so close. It's so close, man. Like looking at some of the real, like some of the shit that comes out of the Unreal Engine is unreal. It's crazy.
Yeah. I'm not like a full-on gamer, but I'm
not a gamer either, but I use the tools. Like, the same tools are.
I have been dabbling in VR stuff, through CTRL-Labs, and but yeah, like I started to play with basically a new version of the Electric Sheep, of the Flame algorithm, that is real time, and where I went back to the geometry.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, like, let's just, draw the particles, just like everybody like draws. I mean, the whole style of like dots and lines is everywhere now anyway.
Yeah.
So I said, like, just like, back a long time ago, it was innovative to go beyond dots and lines. Now it's like retro. So I'm just gonna do it. So I did like a real-time interactive audio responsive Electric Sheep. It's called Dots. It hasn't really been released, but I've done a couple of shows.
Well, send me a copy. I want to play with it. I won't release it. I just want to play with it.
I'm not gonna. No copies. No.
I swear to God, Scott, I'm not gonna put it on the Pirate Bay.
It's just not ready. And especially because we're using it here at CTRL-Labs now. And so some of the demos we're doing are real-time Electric Sheep, the dots, under control of your neural networks.
Man, dude, I really want to talk about that, but I have to go meet my friends for dinner.
Okay.
Next
there's
podcast.
If you go to the website, I think, and look around, you'll find there's some videos online. Or
Real quick though, CTRL-Labs is using biofeedback picked up through your wrist.
That's right. Well, I wouldn't call it. It's not.
I don't
it's
even
not
want to
called
say anything because I don't know what's secret sauce or not. But why don't you describe it?
I'll describe it. It's basically CTRL-Labs. We make a wristband that reads the nerve signals that come from the muscles that control your hand, and then we decode them using neural nets, and then you can control basically anything in your computer.
It's like keyboard 2.0. It's like the future of UI.
That's the plan. And so the first thing we're targeting is the XR market, virtual reality.
Makes sense.
That you can, in VR, you can see your hands and they look like your hands and they do what your hands are doing.
Yep.
And you can control a user interface, in VR.
It's so fucking cool. Like the other day when we were watching that drone be piloted by those guys with the... It's crazy. This office is ridiculous.
Thanks. Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, dude, this was really fun. But before we go, also, you are selling your electric sheep right now as a subscription model.
That's right. So that was we started talking about the business model. The VJ thing didn't work out.
It never does, honestly.
especially
I know one VJ who has like made a career.
It was a great way to get invited to a lot of parties. Had a lot of fun.
Fun way to spend your 20s.
But yeah, not super profitable. And the bottom line is the club industry is a fucking nightmare.
Yeah, who wants to spend their time in nightclubs?
Drugs and alcohol is not my.
I mean, if you're participating, it's fun for a couple nights. But if you have to be working at a club and sober, not so much.
So anyway, that business model passed, and then I asked myself the question, where are the visuals respected? Where do I really, because in the club scene, it's all about the DJ.
Yes, it is.
They show up with a box of records. I have to bring the fucking the projector.
Right.
Anyway, I don't even want to talk about it.
It's traumatic memories.
So I said, basically the answer is, where are the visuals respected? The answer is, it's art.
Yeah.
And so then that's when I started to make high-end art out of the electric sheep. And that's when I want to return to that aesthetic question. When I started making high-end art, like high-def animation with the electric sheep, I was not using the most popular winners of the genetic algorithm, because those are the rainbow unicorns.
Right.
So I would pick my favorites.
You're the curator.
I was the curator.
Yeah.
So it was my personal favorites created by the AI, picked by me, but the AI, of course, is working based on human feedback and also human designed and uploaded things. So we went beyond merely AI Darwinian evolution. We added in intelligent design.
Whoa, dude.
Which by that I mean that Apophysis program, remember?
Yeah.
So there's a whole community of people who use the GUI, the Apophysis GUI, and Apophysis has now spawned more competitors. The best one out there is called Chaotica.
I think I've heard of that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like the latest and greatest sort of flame algorithm.
I thought we were getting fundamental there for a second.
So there's a community of people who make their own designs, human designs, not AI designs, and then upload them to the Electric Sheep server.
Do they get mated and voted
then
on?
if they're popular, they join in. They're part of the gene pool.
Then it's natural selection all the way.
So so there's many layers of human, so that's why I say collective intelligence. There's like contributions from me, from the community, from the software, from the AI, from the history. It's like the final result is just like, it's just like a little bit of everything. So it's like collective intelligence.
Yeah.
And that's cool, really the sort of the way AI
merging with machines.
Yeah.
I'm convinced that's the way of the future. I am. It's got to be a hybrid.
Me too. I mean, it's the best of both worlds. Each domain has its strengths, and together we're greater than the sum of the parts.
Right. Cool. Well, where do they find your software?
So you can go to electricsheep.org. That's the place to get the electric sheep. I do want to show you. I know we're running out of time, but I'll show you. I told you I have a new artwork.
Yeah.
So the electric sheep is free and open source, but you can pay $20 and get what I call the gold premium version of the electric sheep, which is high def.
Yep.
And looks better. And if you want,
is it literally just higher resolution?
It's higher resolution in time and space, so more pixels.
Right. Well, I got a 4K display, so
yeah. Well, it's not 4K.
I'll plop that $20 down.
Please. And I'll show you though that let me just go back. So I did do the next level thing, which then though is, if you're really into, I wanted to make a physical object to deliver the electric sheep, and so this is what I came up with.
Yeah, you were telling me about this.
Yeah, so here it is.
I'll put a link to this on our, or I'll put an image of this on the.
I can send you this. You can put an image of this. There is no link to this because I haven't put it on the website yet.
Yeah, well, take some like really
brand
like
new.
framed up shots, dude. I'll put them on the site.
That'd be awesome.
That's beautiful, man.
Yeah, I'm about.
God, these patterns are so trippy. Jesus Christ, I haven't looked at Electric Sheep in literally 5 years, man.
Oh my god. Well, get the gold version.
Yeah. It's so gorgeous. I just want to like literally. I want to put this on a screen on my wall. As like a moving like.
But this is like, you know, this is like a 10-inch LCD with like custom water jet cut aluminum. It's like you can't see. There's like it all holds together. You can either put it on a table or hang it on the wall.
Yeah, it's sexy looking, man. That's a nice presentation.
And it comes totally loaded with like a perfect data.
Why do you have the microcontroller like right up there in?
Yeah,
that's an interesting aesthetic decision, my
yes.
friend.
Yeah, so most people would hide it and just put it behind there. I put it up there to make this look like it's a figure. This is the head.
Yeah.
This is the body.
Right.
These are the robots, AIs come to humanity.
Yeah.
So it's like it's supposed to.
That is the Electric Sheep.
Yeah, that is exactly. it's you know, and the Electric Sheep is really like I don't know. These are the emissaries from this AI world, from the singularity in our future to us here.
Yeah.
And you know, the Electric Sheep is this sort of message of love, really, from mathematics to us.
It's definitely the most beautiful math I've ever seen. I'll give it that. And it's brilliant. You're a genius, dude.
Oh, dude, you're too kind. Thank you.
All right, man. Well, I'm gonna cut it.
Cut it.
Thanks a lot.